Okay, so here we're staying in this room until we get to break. We have a break then at 11:30, but we're going straight into the next session. We have a jam-packed program today, and this theme is all around immersive learning. So we have a number of colleagues and guests here in the room that are going to be presenting. And now, delighted to have our first speaker, Jacqueline Toll from the Dropout team. Lovely to have you, Jacqueline. And Jacqueline has done a lot of work with the Digital Education Hub, and she is going to share insights from the Digital Education Hub report on immersive learning, innovative pedagogies, techniques, best practice, and trends. And this involves quite a number of colleagues in Ireland and different institutes, universities, and right across Europe. So Jacqueline is one of the leads in this report that we published. So nice to have you. And is that coming up? Are you sharing?
No, we'll just take a moment anyway.
Okay, we'll just take 2 minutes. Okay.
And good morning, everyone. So just to recap there, I'm Jacqueline Toll from Dundalk Institute of Technology, and I teach animation, immersive technologies, and mainly on a MSc level. And so I'm delighted to be here this morning. And so last year I became involved in a project, part of the European Digital Education Hub, and it was an immersive learning squad. And so it was an open call as such, and were quite a number of different people with different expertise in immersive technologies, teaching and learning, digital skills and so on, all came together. And in an online and 2-week kind of, or 2 months, intensive kind of workshop. And then we produced an output. So I just want to talk you through kind of our processes, and then I'll show you some of the example of the final output that we put together. Okay, and so just a little bit about what immersive learning is then, and so it's kind of a wide term as such, and I know personally I think of immersive learning as where a student or someone can be really immersed in a real world kind of presence, and it gives them kind of a more real world experience. And so just a couple of quotes there. So it offers action oriented teaching and learning. And for example, if you do have a headset, or if you're using augmented reality experiences, they kind of make it a little bit more real world, and the students a little bit more engaged in the task. And grounded in constructivism. So a student becomes more active, they're less passive, and then it gives more of a greater kind of experiential learning experience for them. And so particularly in an immersive setting, and it gives greater presence, and then because you've got sound, you've got interactables, and it gives more multi-sensory kind of engagement. So the kind of key areas in the context, particularly of our immersive learning squad, it's really extended reality, and that includes like virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And so if you haven't came across those before, and mostly in education, and we use lots of different digital technologies and tools and so on, but we have our virtual reality, which is the most immersive, and then in the other end of the scale with the augmented reality, which is a mix of the real world with overlays, and then mixed reality as well. And for example, you can still don a headset, but you can see holograms and elements, so you still see the real world as well. So these would be the main areas: augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality, and under that kind of umbrella. And XR, which if you haven't heard of that term before, that is short for extended reality. So that's our kind of umbrella head that encapsulates those. And it becomes more interesting for teaching and learning. So I've just put a couple of examples in just to illustrate and those different areas. and augmented reality. And I did a workshop last week with some girls, and they were trying to get them to think about using more sustainability sort of systems thinking driven approach. So they created some augmented reality experiences. But these are some well-known ones like Pokemon Go and IKEA Place, where you can place furniture in your room, and then Google Maps. And virtual reality is the most immersive, and where you put on the headset and then you're fully immersed in an experience, and then have a mixed reality over there. So that's just sets the scene a little bit to what the immersive technologies are. So coming to our squad, so last year, and there was an open call that went out and on the European Digital Education Hub, and we have a link to that inside of the report as well. And so they have different squads for generative AI, explainable AI, digital learning, future skills learning. So there's lots of different interactive hubs, and where you can apply and through an application form, and then there's different sections within that. So it's a really nice online European digital community where you can mix with lots of like-minded kind of educators. It is funded by the European Commission. So we were known as Squad 11, and it was 2 months. And then so I had a really great opportunity within that to be the squad lead. So that was really a brilliant experience for me, because we felt like we were kind of a little a whole peer learning within our group as well. So there's a lot of learning from my experience, learning from other people within that team, and we use Microsoft Teams. So we used that, and we had lots of regular kind of meetings. So these were some of the names, and which are listed in our report. And then, so we can see we have a mix from Italy, Spain, France, and so on, and Austria. There was really a wide scale of people. And then we had Rasmus Benke Agberg, so he was the team lead within the European Digital Education Hub, and Leon Kosh as well. And this was just a small screenshot of our regular kind of meetings as such that we would have had within our group. So it was between March and April. So we had 2 months, and where we had to come up with some sort of a meaningful output that we could produce and that could be shared. And so on our first meeting, and I decided probably it would be a good idea if we could have like a brainstorm. So a Miro board was set up, and then we had quite of a, if anybody's ever used Miro, we had lots of post-its and lots of ideas that were bounced around to decide what we would produce. So this is just a closer up of version of the output discussions. So our ideas were maybe a 3D environment, illustrated documents with links, websites, immersive learning papers, blogs, and so on. So we had lots of ideas of what we might produce. And then content. So within it, we had a list of different things. We had best practices, immersive learning versus traditional, and we focused on HE, but we also wanted to keep it wider to consider teaching and learning in maybe secondary schools as well, and also teachers that maybe in primary schools. So we wanted to keep it more inclusive when we were considering the types of things that we would add into the output. And then we looked at some examples of inspiring output. So we had lots of links, and we have our Miro board was very kind of an insightful brainstorming session at the start. So then once we had a good brainstorm, we had a very tight time scale. We decided that we would produce something that would be suitable for educators, as I said, in schools, further education and higher education. And then these were kind of the key topics that we thought within the group, because there was a wealth of experience within the group, that we could contribute and compile a report. So the first kind of section there was techniques and pedagogies, where we were trying to think of maybe innovative ways of using immersive technologies, from inclusive learning to using like universal design for learning as well. And then best practices. So we wanted to kind of give real world examples of how immersive technologies are used, and within the kind of European context. And then we wanted to give some directions and trends. And then within immersive technologies, things do change quite regularly, and technology is always updating as well. So yeah, and the time scale was tight. We had the schedule, and we had to keep it quite tight, and we had maybe regular meetings too. So, and we had like a key milestone dates there, and because in our first month in March there was a lot of discussion, and then we had to set dates in April and right up, because everything had to be finished by April the 30th. And so, and then we had our little groups, and we split into subgroups as well. So we had a techniques and pedagogies group, best practices, and then we had an emerging trends group. And so within that, we might have had mini bubbles, and again, some discussions and lots of meetings. So obviously we kept our weekly meetings, and within our groups as well. So just on some of the main topical areas, and I'll show you the report. But so these were our kind of main headings, and I put some examples in. So we were looking at user experience design and evaluation for immersive learning, and thinking about the user as kind of central at the start, and maybe developing using theory like cognitive load theory to experiment and experience. And you can see up at the top, I've just added an example in where the user interface there. And again, there was lots of hotspots and menus within that, where a user could walk around as embodied as an avatar, and then interact. So that type of thing was trying to give a more real world immersive kind of learning experience. Okay. Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Yes. And then we had again, we had some examples down here of some immersive learning, and then designing, approaches and techniques. Okay. So, and best practices. So I put in. So we had lots of best practice examples, and the island of memory, the VR virtual labs, chemistry labs, immersive language learning, and extended reality as well. And then we have some of these key examples. So I've just shown some pictures, and these were all within the report. And so some kind of useful tools I've added in Mesh. So that's a Microsoft plugin, which might be accessible. And Unity Vuforia are free. Frame VR is free, spatial, and Engage. And they're very easy tools to use. And for you don't have to have really a lot of technical knowledge, but they can be very easy for most educators to experience and use with. And so again, some key trends: AI and XR is kind of going to be a forthcoming area as such, and serious games, and then avatars. Again, there's lots of development, the whole embodied experience to make it more real world, as such holograms and digital twins, like using maybe photogrammetry and so on to scan things to make like a virtual digital classroom compared to real. But there still is the challenges. So equity, security was mentioned earlier, motion sickness, and then staff capacity for skills development. So again, within our hub, we had a short time scale, and it was challenging, obviously, to get times for us all to meet, because we might have been teaching our different time scales and the different time. And then in my own teaching practice, I'm exploring, again, building little virtual immersive environments as such. So I'll just show you maybe quickly the report.
That's the
Oh, right.
sorry,
Okay.
yeah. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's fantastic. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Okay, thank you.
And well done with the work with the Digital Education Hub. It's fantastic. We're doing a lot of, this year we have about 38 programs that want to delve into immersive learning. So I know we're going to collaborate and talk a little bit more. So thank you, Jacqueline. Okay, thank you. So next up, we have our own Dr. Sarah Carroll. And Sarah is flying the flag for Tutor today, and she is representing the Student Empowerment Coordinators and herself, and Alia Antropova, and me, and Maura Maguire. and great, we have Sharon here in the room as well from Tutor, and we're going to Sarah's going to look at the Student Empowerment Programme and the Student Partnership Programme. And in particular, she's going to share with you co-creating digital transformation in higher education, exploring the impact of the Tutor student as partners in innovation and change fellowships. Is that okay? Is it coming through okay online? Yeah? Can we get all good? Over to you.
Thanks, Karina.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's me. Thanks to introduction, Karina. So Tutor project came to a close, unfortunately, last December. So this is a slice of that work. How do I? Oh, there we go. So yeah, most people in this room know what Tutor is, but for legal reasons, it was an innovative collaboration across the technological higher education sector, and the overarching aim was to transform the student experience. So it was a collaborative initiative across the 7 partner institutions across the country, and ATU, of course, was one of them. The whole work was actually underpinned by 4 streams, but early on it was 3 streams, and stream 1, which was all about empowering the student experience through empowerment, is where this work is focused. So embedded in the stream 1 team, there was a research team of which I was a part of, along with Karina Ginty, Maura Maguire from Dundalk IT, and Olia Antropova, who was technically employed by ATU, but actually based in Dundalk IT, and is now based at Dundalk IT, actually. So we did a lot throughout the Tutor programme, and if you're interested in learning more about what the embedded research team did, you can look up our SWAY, which kind of lists all our work and our outputs, but I'm only going to talk about a part of it today. So the Tutor Students as Partners Innovation and Change Fellowships is the focus of today's talk, and these were student-staff partnerships that were all about addressing challenges or enhancing the student experience at the individual partner institutions. The work was framed around these 5 themes: academic integrity and assessment, digital transformation, education for sustainability, EDI, UDL, and employability. And of course, today is focusing all about digital transformation in teaching and learning, which is great because it's still relevant to my current role as Organisational Impact Coordinator, because one of the strategic priorities for ATU strategic plan is enabling a digital campus. So all still very relevant. The fellowships, there is about 175. There is roughly over 1,800 student partners, 600 staff partners, and each fellowship project got about €5,000 as part of a budget. I can't really speak more about the fellowships without giving due credit to the amazing student empowerment coordinators that really kind of drove the whole thing. So each institution was locally supported by a different student empowerment coordinator, and that's a picture of them all there. The fellowship projects started off varied institution to institution, but roughly early spring 23. A lot kind of happened the first year and a half, and we kind of came on the scene to evaluate the projects roughly June 2024. And the picture there is actually part of a national showcase that happened in April 24. So we were interested in assessing different aspects of the fellowship projects, of which there was 175. And the main way we went about doing this was we gave each project group in an MS Forms survey to complete, and it asked them things about the composition, their aims, whether they achieved them, the perceived benefits of staff and students, how many people they reached, what their plans were to sustain the impact of the projects, and any challenges and lessons learned. And we analysed these findings and put together this book, which is available here, this book of 95 case studies. And I'm actually just going to pop them up here, and then people can take them. They're on the floor. So from the survey findings, we're able to kind of extrapolate that on average, involved in the fellowship groups, there was roughly 1,000 students, 500 students, 500 staff. They reached on average 700 staff and nearly 5,000 students, and they projected that over the next couple of years, because a lot of the outputs were designed to be sustainable and reusable and integrated curriculum, that they could reach up to 10,000 students. So it really demonstrated how a relatively small initiatives, small projects, when given the right amount of platform, visibility and support, can really achieve a much wider impact. So the case studies in this book, they're kind of organised across the 5 themes, and the focus of today is digital transformation and learning. So each project, there's a page per project. The case studies look like this. So at the top, there is the title that'll tell you about the project and where it's based and what theme it is in. We have a little bit about the project context, so who are the students and staff partners, what kind of keywords. So this example was STEM. And what resource category, so the output that they co-created, what kind of output it was. The fellowship project description will tell you the aim of the project, the key activities, and the main outputs and outcomes. And in many situations, when they've co-created a resource, we've included the QR code or the link to the particular resource that's available. Sometimes it's APU specific, and sometimes it's more general. We also have a section on actionable strategies, so challenges, solutions, what lessons they would give to others on similar projects. And this sidebar is all about the perceived impact, so the reach, the benefits of students and staff, and what they felt was the most meaningful benefit. Everything was analysed through a logic change model, so we looked at the inputs, the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes. And this helped us to identify not only the cases where it's categorized by theme, but looking at the outputs, we're able to kind of categorize what kind of co-created outputs people made. So there's digital resources and platforms, events and workshops, methods to innovate teaching, physical resources and facilities, and surveys and research, guidelines and toolkits. So unsurprisingly, digital transformation, there was a lot of digital resources and platforms, but there are also other types of resources underneath this theme. So for example, this was a digital project where the category of the output was really about trialing an innovative method and teaching. So in this example, they wanted to enhance students' digital transformation in AI marketing. And they compared different ways to make marketing strategies using traditional methods or ChatGPT. The digital resources spanned across different themes, so different colours represented different end-tutor theme. So it just kind of showed that digital transformation really was cross-thematic across the project. Here's an example of one that was really linked to sustainable development goals, but they were using TikTok to make videos to kind of increase knowledge to students about the SDGs. In the book, you'll find several pages that's dedicated to going through the impact evaluation key findings. I don't have time to go through them today, but they're in the book. And so someone would probably ask whether there is a difference in the theme of the project based on the perceived skills enhanced. Not really. So you can see here, these are the different skills that projects felt were enhanced for students. And in the bright blue, in digital transformation, all the skills, a range of the skills were enhanced. So it didn't really matter what kind of theme your project was in, the students still perceived a benefit to these skills taking part in the project. If you'd like to find out more about the student-staff partnership projects, these are some relevant QR codes. The first is kind of an introduction booklet designed, kind of pitched at any level, what are student-staff partnerships. The second is a flip book that goes through all the partnership projects. And the third is the book that I've described here, and there's copies available in the audience. I'll leave that there for a second because people are scanning. It's my last slide pretty much anyway. And there are sponsors, well, funders, supporters. Can I go back? Nope. Yeah, so now it's your turn for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to take questions at the end. Is that okay? Thanks a million. So fantastic work. So next up, we have, and I will share the link in the chat. For those that are online, we'll share the link of those 3 publications in a moment online. So next up, we have Kevin? Is there slides? Okay, they're open. All right. Next up, we have Sarah Thielen, Loretta Goff, but it's Sarah that's with us today from UCC, but our colleagues Loretta Goff and Mary Ryan from UCC. And Sarah is going to present on where are we and where do we need to be supporting staff and student Gen AI literacy. Perfect. Here you go. Thank you, Sarah.
Brilliant. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Just want to stress that this is very much a project with the three of us. It's actually sort of two projects that have come together with Dr. Loretta Goff in the Skills Center. She's the Academic Integrity Officer at UCC. Dr. Marie Ryan, she's a lecturer in the Economics Department. And myself, I'm Dr. Sarah Thielen. I'm in the Teaching and Learning Unit at UCC. I'm the digital education sort of specialist there. And this project is coming out of some work done at DCU around surveying where people are now, just getting a baseline of what kind of use people are doing, where they see Gen AI. And what we did is we surveyed, get this to the right spot here. We surveyed staff and students. So there's two projects here. Both were saddle funded, and there's AI Integrity, which surveyed UCC staff on Gen AI usage roughly from December 2024 to January 2025. So these are really early results and responses. We got about 157 responses. Considering the timing, I'm pretty happy with that. We might kind of go out and do this again in a year or two to just kind of keep tracking it and see where things are. And then Gen AI Learn is a project surveying UCC students on their use of and views of Gen AI. And that survey ran from October to November 2024. 1,000 responses from across the 4 colleges. Of course, on both of these, not everyone answered every question. So some of the more granular results, when that comes time for us to share those, they don't always 100% line up. But there's some really interesting findings here. And coming out of the survey for the Gen AI Learn project, which was a bit larger, did a Students as Partners element to build a Gen AI learning hub to direct students and support students in sort of careful and thoughtful usage. So that's kind of a quick glance at the surveys. And I'm just really quickly gonna kind of fly through the findings here. I'm happy to talk more about this at question and answer, at the coffee break, but I know, time is of the essence, and I just want to kind of give you a snapshot here. So for staff, about 90% have never heard of anything other than ChatGPT. So for them, ChatGPT is Gen AI. They are one and the same. And so there's an education piece there, right? To say, look, there's other tools. They don't know about all these specialized tools that are out there. There's a really interesting adoption pattern that was sort of surfaced in the more free response sections, the text-based responses, where they start by playing around and experimenting, go straight to assessment. That's always sort of the first stop. And then they kind of think about integration and more advanced applications. And some of the reasons for not using, I think, would be familiar to all of you here. It's that, we've got an environmental impact, you've got knowledge gaps, they don't understand, there's really serious ethical objections and security concerns. A lot of people thus far are saying, the ones who aren't using are saying, I don't see it adding anything. I've got my process and we're here, right? And then you have people who are just absolutely not, I do not agree, I am taking a principled stand, and so we probably won't reach them anyway. But of the ones who are kind of in other spaces, the real advice we've picked up and that we're going to be working on building over the coming year is this idea of tiered supports. So you need foundational stuff, but there's people who are way beyond those foundations. And so what kind of supports are we going to build beyond that? Practical applications, peer learning, assessment integration, all of these kind of things to kind of build out a suite of resources. Multi-leveled support is really key there. And then, of course, ethical and policy guidance from the university, from departments, from programs. And, we're working on those, and we're going to use some of these results to kind of inform what's coming next. So for students, it's, not as hugely different as some people might have expected. So you have 84% of students have used a Gen AI tool. I'm sure it is higher now. This was in November. but their primary tool as well is ChatGPT. Something I found really interesting is the uses they're putting Gen AI to. And these go from kind of the most, which is about, I think, 19%, to the least. So you have summarizing information, clarifying concepts. It's kind of using it to work through ideas, down to only 2% self-report. You know, there's a bias there, of course, completing assessments. So it's a really huge range. And if we fixate too much on one element, we're going to lose a lot there. And that's kind of one of the takeaways we're doing. And that's coming into that Gen AI Learning Hub. 69% believe that Gen AI can make their learning more effective. 24% disagree. So I think you've got an interesting tension there where sometimes it's easy to kind of project onto the students that it's that they're sort of this monolithic group of digital natives just stampeding Gen AI. But there's a lot of nuance here. The biggest thing coming out of this for us, and I won't go through these line by line, is effectively a real lack of guidance being provided to students, which is where this Learning Hub is coming in for. So 69% have had no formal training, and only 40% have received any sort of guidance on what to use, how to use it. And of that 40%, 60% report that the guidance was clear. So if we break that down, roughly, I'm a historian, so my maths are what they are. Roughly 24% of the students here felt they got clear guidance. That is a huge problem. And that's where that Learning Hub is coming in to give this guidance, to encourage staff to give guidance. And again, coming back to the university piece. And so just given the focus on assessment here today, I wanted to show kind of one breakdown. And this is a response to the same question. We tried really hard in these surveys to mirror the questions as much as possible. So this question, and I see I did not send the correct slide with the question. It's something along the lines of, you know, what level of AI use is acceptable in assessment? And this was asked to students and asked to staff. And I think it's really interesting that, you know, you get a bit more of students saying, you know, a bit more student use, but still that idea of full use with no restrictions, it's actually fewer students think that's okay. And I think that's really interesting. And you have a similar breakdown into this idea of planning, studying, but not in the final submission. So I took a lot of hope out of this when I put these next to each other and said, look, we're actually not that far apart. I think it's worth, you know, we're going to hopefully do some focus groups parsing what exactly both populations mean by some of these phrases, because I suspect there's differences there. But it's not this sort of students really think they should just use it for everything. There's a lot of nuance there in the way students are thinking about Gen AI and the way they're approaching it. And I think it's just really, really important for us to kind of remember that and to say, look, what we need to do is be clear about what we're accomplishing, what we're assessing. What is this assessment setting out to do, and where does Gen AI fit? And I think that kind of pulling those things together will create that guidance that the students need, but will also help create clarity for the staff, the academic staff, the teaching staff, people teaching to say, look, what am I trying to teach? You know, we had that question of, is it the assessment or is it what we're assessing? And I think that's one of the things I find really interesting with these debates around Gen AI, is it's really forcing us to be really clear to ourselves and then to our students about what is it I'm assessing. When I give my essay, say I give my take-home essay, am I assessing your ability to write an essay or to do historical research? Those are actually quite different things. And we can think about, is it worth disaggregating those? So I found this a really interesting result. Happy to talk about more of them. And as we kind of put reports together, we'll circulate those. And then again, if you want to reach us, that's how you can reach us. And happy to answer questions along the way. So.
Thanks, Sarah. Is that still on? It is. Great work. We must chat again after the conference and compare some of the work that we've been doing here in ATU. Yeah.
It's great to see some.
Yeah, we need to establish a network across the country to come together.
A lot of people are reinventing the wheel on their own.
I know, we need to come together. Exactly, exactly. But we'll have a couple of questions shortly. Thanks, Sarah. So next up we have Jeremiah, Dr. Jeremiah Spillane from NTU. Great to have you with us. And Tom is here as well from, I think he went off to the workshop. Did he? He abandoned you. So next, thanks, Orla.
Okay, thanks everybody. So in this presentation, I'm going to discuss an in-process virtual reality or creative work entitled Gúfánach, which explores the mediation of cultural practices. At its core, this is an artistic investigation into how traditional cultural practices can be mediated through virtual or more broadly extended reality or XR. So while the piece was originally conceived as a creative project, it's prompted me to reflect on the pedagogical potential of XR in arts-based learning and teaching. It raises questions about how XR can be used to teach subjects like arts, culture, and heritage through immersive, contextual, and decontextualized experiences. And I think it suggests new ways for students to inhabit imagined spaces, encouraging a form of speculative, philosophical, and experiential learning. So when I think of the typical uses of XR in education, my mind goes to like healthcare training, engineering or lab simulations, and in the arts, I'd usually associate it with contemporary digital media or creative technologies. So as such, this piece, with its focus on traditional cultural practices, appears to be an unusual case study and one that I think opens up new possibilities that are worth your consideration. So today I'll begin by outlining the concept and the artistic approach. I'll touch briefly on the relevant literature and the key ideas, and then I'll show you a short trailer for the piece so you can see what I'm talking about. And then from there, I'll consider the educational potential of the project. And just as a quick aside then, so this photograph here, which is actually in the archives in the University of Galway, is of the Uilleann Piper Seamus Ennis. It's from 1952. And in the background, you have Jean Ritchie, who is here on a Fulbright scholarship. And she's here documenting these traditional music practices. She's recording them. And of course, the photograph then is another kind of form of mediation that's happening. So even though we think of these traditional practices as kind of being oral, they're constantly being mediated. So jumping back to the piece then, so sean-nós singing is sometimes perceived as a historical practice, and this is usually vis-a-vis more technologically driven and popular music practices. But of course, this isn't the case. Traditional Irish music and sean-nós singing are contemporary practices where modern performers variously draw on stylistic approaches from the past and the present, continuing the practice as a living tradition into the future. So in this piece, I've collaborated with the folklorist and traditional musician and singer Aoife Granville, who performs a piece that draws on previous recordings, one particularly by Maura and Seamus Begley from their 1989 album. So the work, it's a VR work, and it's a two-stage encounter. So the user first, they put on the headset, they go into this archival space where they find a record and a gramophone. And after experiencing this space, they can teleport to another virtual space, which is like a cottage scene, where they find a contemporary sean-nós singer singing that same piece of music. And this transition, the idea is that it destabilizes the boundary between the past and the present, the archive and the embodiment of the singer. So, and again, this is kind of hinted at by our colleague from DKIT. This is the virtuality continuum. So what I'm talking about here is virtual reality, but it's augmented, so it's got real video of a real person in there. Just in terms of the literature then, so the kind of the concept of this artwork is kind of based on ideas from these different authors. So on the left there we have Evan Eisenberg in his book The Recording Angel. He talks about the transformative nature of the phonograph and describes records as time machines, devices that transport voices from one era into another, collapsing the boundaries of past and present. Derrida, well, I'm really drawing on Mark Fisher, who's inspired by Derrida. He's got his idea of hauntology, which is a kind of a play on the term ontology, describes the concept of a time out of joint and kind of futures that never happened. And he speaks to that same kind of temporal dislocation where the past does not remain static, but returns in kind of ghostly and unpredictable ways. And Bruno Latour, who you know from actor network theory, he explores in his essay on technical mediation, explores how actants, both human and technological, actively shape experiences. And he describes the socio-technical networks, arguing that technical artifacts are not neutral vessels, but active agents in the transformation of reality. So in terms of virtual reality, then, the devices, they don't function as kind of passive things. They're kind of active containers for traditions, much like records are, and so on. And so in the piece then, I'm kind of trying to incorporate this hauntological idea, emphasizing a kind of a spectral quality of the Shano Singers video in a kind of virtual reality space, presenting it both as past and present, future as well, and kind of thinking of Eisenberg's idea of the phonograph as a kind of a temporal portal. So I'm going to really quickly just try and show you a little clip of the piece, kind of a trailer. Should I? No, I won't share. Will I share? So you can hear Aoife Granville singing the piece here. This is the kind of archival space that the user goes into when they put on the headset. And they see that original recording that kind of inspired her version of this song. And in the background then you have this kind of portal that brings you to a new space, and that brings you into this space. And this is a cottage which is still under development. I guess it's kind of like an uncanny space of kind of Irish tradition, you know, the kind of cottage in the countryside. And just being mindful of time, once you go into the cottage, then you find the singer in this kind of decontextualized space that's kind of out of time singing this piece. So that's kind of like the idea of the piece, this kind of remediation of kind of traditional practice. And as I said, it was kind of intended as a kind of an artwork, but thinking about it in terms of pedagogy, I think is also useful. I'll get on to now. I think I've got another 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah. So back to the pedagogy then. So in the same way that the ideas from these writers can inform the artistic idea, these theoretical frameworks can be turned into springboards for experiential educational experiences. So from an educational technologies perspective, the tour's idea of technical mediation helps us to rethink the role of tools in learning. So how they become actant. So the headset itself, how that becomes an actor of mediation in the process. In terms of Mark Fisher and his use of hauntology, this kind of XR experience can facilitate learning, not just about culture, but how to think with or in culture, something that's kind of unstable and contested, you know, where something is no longer fully present. And I think in this age of generative AI, where we worry so much about the risks to critical thinking, these kind of speculative learning experiences can be very, very useful, and they can help students to think about the erasures or the appropriations or the transformations of tradition. And this says something about the fragility of cultural transmission in the digital age, and VR becomes a kind of a speculative space to re-engage in those gaps. And then finally, Eisenberg's idea of recordings being like time travel. This can help students, you know, in the VR headset to kind of build emotional or historical empathy. So it's kind of a speculative historical simulator. And actually, a really great example of this is this piece by Linda Curtin and Keating, based on the painting Men of the South. So they have this 360 immersive video where you're kind of brought into the scene of the picture, and there's kind of lots of interpretive ideas about the work. So it's a real kind of experiential learning experience. Really nice example of that. It's kind of mindful of time here. So yeah, and then finally, maybe just addressing the kind of educational outcomes. So I think this kind of interpretive XR experience facilitates an understanding of how cultural continuity and transformation allows students to witness how something like a Shano's performance might evolve through technological intervention. Secondly, I think it introduces the concept of embodied learning, where learners do not merely analyze historical material, which often happens in arts education, but through immersion, and they can kind of physically and emotionally engage with it through immersive technologies. And then finally, the work promotes a digital literacy, which is obviously important for all of our students, by encouraging critical engagement of emerging media. So rather than simply acquiring technical proficiency, the learners are kind of prompted to question how these tools shape perception, meaning, and cultural identity. And then just in conclusion then, so to simplify all this then, really the kind of pedagogical idea here is it's kind of a speculative approach, and it can be summed up as a kind of what-if tool. So rather than simply presenting historical content, this kind of XR work can be used to encourage learners to imaginatively engage with what might have been or what could still emerge from that entanglement of the past, the present, and the future. So what I'm kind of trying to do here is suggest how XR, so that could be augmented reality or virtual reality, can be meaningfully integrated into arts-based curricula and consider new ways to promote experiential and reflective learning, specifically around traditional cultural practices. This kind of work and its potential for learning and teaching allows us to think more about imaginative pedagogies beyond outcomes focused or content delivery models. Thank you. That's